Zimbabwe is currently facing a man-made starvation, with 60% of the people failing to meet basic food needs, according to a UN special envoy last week after touring the South African country. Hilal Elva, the special reporter on the right to food, ranked Zimbabwe amongst the top 4 countries facing severe food shortages outside nations in conflict zones. Now, the people of Zimbabwe are slowly getting to a point of suffering heavily on what is described as a man-made starvation, and technically it is. The people in Zimbabwe didn't help themselves when they got the country back from Rhodesia, and the Rothschilds funded Dutch clowns, the De Boers and others, and went about torturing and shooting and killing all the white people who had the farms. And subsequently, they torched all the farms and the equipment, and within 12 months, they were all starving. That's not the right way to go forward. And we have to be a lot more sensible than that. Just because certain white people who are funded by the sub-grey race doesn't mean you have to brush them all under the same carpet, so to speak. But that's what happened. And Africa needs a lot of help, and it doesn't need more mainstream media publicised charities like Live Aid either. We need to get the trust fund to those countries and get them up to scratch. So the reports said that adding that 8 million people would be affected by the end of the year, and today Zimbabwe counts amongst the 4 highest food insecure states. And after an 11-day tour, adding that poor harvests were compounded by 490% hyperinflation. Yes, that's the IMF goons and the UN also, along with the World Bank and Rothschilds creating that nonsense. And a staggering 5.5 million people are currently facing food insecurity in rural areas due to a drought, which is also caused by them, that has affected harvests. Another 2.2 million people in urban areas are also facing food shortages and lacked access to minimum public services, including health and safe water. Now, by the end of this year, the food security situation is expected to worsen, with the estimated 8 million people requiring urgent action to reduce food consumption gaps and also save livelihoods, she said. Described the numbers as shocking, and as I said, Zimbabwe is in the grips of an entrenched economic crisis, pervasive corruption, which doesn't help, and it's not just whites doing that either, and poverty, and also a crumbling health system, all part of the population reduction program. And the reports blamed decades of mismanagement under the former president, Robert Mugabe, has failed to rebound under the new leader, Emmerson Mnangagwa, who took over following a military coup 2 years ago. So that tells you that Mugabe wasn't really the problem, because nothing's changed. It's a bit like changing from Republic to Democrat politicians in America, or from Labour to Conservative, or backwards and forwards. It changes nothing, because the policies don't change. That's why I keep saying, when politicians start discussing real policies, then you can support them. Until then, they're best ignored. The Iraq Prime Minister Abdel Mahdi has submitted his resignation, according to his office, after more than 40 people were killed on the bloodiest day since anti-government protests began in Iraq. and Iraq's top Shia Muslim cleric condemned the use of force against protesters and called for a new government. About 400 people have been killed in protests in Iraq since the start of October, and at least 15 died on Friday alone. Now, the Iraqis, like the Chilean people and Hong Kong and many others that are complaining around the world now, are demanding jobs, an end to corruption, and better public services. And the statement said he would present his resignation to Parliament so lawmakers can select a new government. And this came after the Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani called for a new government also. But the problem Iraq has is the same problem Iran has. They won't have stability in that country until they turf out the CIA and the Mossad agents running everything in those countries. Period. Sudan finally acting in a more civilized manner, thankfully. And it has repealed a restrictive public order law that controlled how women acted and dressed in public. And the Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok paid tribute to women who had endured the atrocities that resulted from the implementation of this particular law. Now, the country's transitional authorities also dissolved the party of the former President Omar al-Bashir. Mr. Bashir had seized power in a 1989 coup, led by the same clowns that are running Iraq and Iran, I might add, and ruled for nearly 30 years before peaceful protests ousted him back in April. Now, in July 2008, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, Luis Moreno Ocampo, accused al-Bashir of genocide, crimes against humanity, and also war crimes in Darfur. And the court issued an arrest warrant for Mr. al-Bashir in 2009 on counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but then subsequently ruled, no doubt by the same clowns, that there was insufficient evidence to prosecute him for genocide. That means they were protecting other people or other groups, period. That's how it works. Now, Sudan is currently led by a joint military and civilian council, as well as a civilian-led cabinet headed by the Prime Minister Hamdok. So what was behind this was a blend of legal and moral prohibitions that was designed to exclude and intimidate women from actively participating in public life. And they gave the authorities sweeping powers to arbitrarily control what women wore, whom they spoke to and saw, and any job they may hold, with any perceived offender facing punishment by flogging or, in rare cases, stoning and even execution. The news of that law in Sudan was celebrated in the streets in the capital, Khartoum, as the news of the law ending was publicised. Good stuff. Need a number of other countries that goes across the middle band of this planet to enact that. It's beyond a joke at this day and age. And I have a feeling we have more on that type of incident later on. Worrying news about the American car industry and also the cost of them as well. And it was found that Americans are paying about 38% more for a new car or truck over the summer than they were just 10 years ago. And the average transaction price for some popular vehicles was up nearly 50, 60 or even 70%. And the question being asked by the report was, so how are drivers affording it? And the answer was, many are not. And they gave an example in Vineland, New Jersey. The typical family takes home about $39,000 a year after taxes, and it is recommended that only 10 to 15% of that income monthly should be spent on a vehicle. And that leaves an average family there with about $400 a month budget. Now, manager Ivan Nelson showed Docupul a Ford Explorer new car packed with new technology, and he also took a look at the F-150 Lariat. But did any of it fit the budget of $400? No, not even close. Your monthly payments for that would be $853 a month. Now, last year, a record number of Americans fell behind on their car payments, and more than 7 million people were at least 90 days late. Now, the report says essentially they have priced cars out of a lot of people's budgets, and there are finance companies through these manufacturers now to let people afford these cars by stretching the loans out now to 6, 7, and 8 years on a car. Australia next. More skullduggery involving conglomerates, military, and the corruption that goes on behind the scenes, but a lot of it's now coming into the public view. But the Australian taxpayers are being told they will have to foot the bill for an $85 million, which is 125 million Australian dollars, for the Growler fighter jet that burst into flames on the runway due to an engine fault. Now, the US Navy will not reimburse Australia for the dud warplane. You would think it would be the Air Force, wouldn't you? Oh my, there's a hint in there somewhere. Now, Boeing's engineering woes are not limited just to the civilian field. Of course, we had a lot of issues of design flaws of the Seattle firm's 737 MAX 8 aircraft that were diving into the ground at far too regular intervals before the company was carried out and accused of carrying out shoddy work on the flagship 787 Dreamliner, and before the fuselage of its up-and-coming 777X failed critical pressure testing back in September also. And one of Boeing's military aircraft also suffered a dramatic mishap. Now, the Australian Air Force Boeing EA-18G aircraft burst into flames while attempting takeoff during an exercise with the US Air Force in Nevada last January. And as the plane's pilot gunned it down the runway at full power, a high-pressure compressor inside one of the engines broke into 3 pieces, which tore the jet to pieces as they exploded out of the engine housing. Now, since then, the Australian government has been trying to claim compensation from the US Navy for the loss of the $85 million plane, and it was one of 12 purchased from Washington in 2017. But, however, the Navy has refused to pay the bill. Why? Because they don't have any, that's why. And the Air Vice Marshal Greg Hoffman told an Australian Senate committee that the US position is there is no compensation, and the Australian taxpayer will also be a hit with a $152 billion bill for the country's new fleet of attack submarines, according to a Navy official. Oh dear. It's those 12 submarines were French designed were estimated at 50 billion Australian dollars 3 years ago, and has since crept up to $80 billion, plus $145 billion just to sustain, update and upgrade the vessels until their end of service, said to be in 2080. I think the Australians are going to have to dig deeper in their pocket, or they're going to have to learn to speak up en masse. You know, the Australian economy is not doing well at all, and neither are large portions of their people. Why are Australia spending $152 billion on submarines, or $85 million on planes, when they're already part of the pact along with the US, and also private deals with China as well, as the series Pine Gap mentioned. Sweden next. Billions in dirty funds have been flowing through Danske Bank AS and Swedbank AB, which proved disastrous for the two lenders. But when SEB AB was accused of similar offences, it appears that people were more forgiving, or forgiving, not forgiven. And Johan Torsby said his bank made a clear choice back in 2006 that when SEB started to tackle the kind of non-resident flows that have been at the epicentre of every Nordic-Baltic laundering scandal. There's your clue. Nordic-Baltic, read NATO. And Torsby says SEB's choices are largely thanks to a dead central banker from Russia. Now you know it's NATO connected. Let's all blame Russia. Oh dear. And Danske had about $220 billion in Estonian non-resident flows between 2007 and 2015, and Swedbank reportedly had about $155 billion in high-risk transactions. And SEB says it had about $93 billion in Estonian non-resident flows between 2005 and 2018. Now, both of them are based in Stockholm, and together the two dominate the Baltic banking market, in which large-scale money laundering is alleged to have taken place. And the article states it was largely used for Russian, quote-unquote, criminals eager to get their funds to the West, and the setup was perfect. Except, newsflash to them, it wasn't Russians, as we'll find out soon. The SEB was founded in 1856 by the Wallenberg family, which owns large chunks of corporate Sweden. And the Wallenbergs were quick to throw their support behind the lender after it emerged that about $30 billion in non-resident Estonian flows were exposed to the risk of money laundering. Now, the Swedish media also claim that about $50 million that moved through SEB can be linked to Russian tax fraud that Sergei Magnitsky died trying to investigate. Now, Magnitsky was the lawyer of Hermitage Capital Management and co-founder Bill Browder, who had made it his mission to chase down those tied to the case. For those of you who don't know, the Wallenbergs are nearly as bad as the Rothschilds. They're worse in Sweden, but they have more powerful influence than people realise. Now, Mr. Wallenberg is well known and remembered for saving tens of thousands of so-called Jews in Nazi-occupied Hungary during the Holocaust from German Nazis and Hungarian fascists during the latter stages of World War II. Mr. Wallenberg issued protective passports and sheltered Jews in buildings designated as Swedish territory. Despite checking extensively, there was no mention of him or that family saving the Swedish people. None. That story, as we know from Russia with Love, is repeated all over the internet of so-called home nationals allegedly only saving a group of foreign nationals, and yet no one asks what did they do for their supposedly own people. It just gets ignored. Reports of the Pope saving Jews. What about the Catholics? He's supposed to be the head of the Catholic Church. You know, you could reel off numbers of names. It's almost like a badge of honour. I saved the Jews. But they're the only people that were in World War II. What about your own home nationals? It just gets overlooked. Now, Israel has designated Wallenberg with an award, one of the righteous among the nations, which is an award for non-Jewish people, except Wallenberg is Jewish. UK next. Both Facebook and Go Ogle have come under fire in the UK over low tax bills. Yeah, perhaps they'll do what the stupid Irish did, or the corrupt Irish is a better term, when I think it was Go Ogle was found to owe €14.5 billion, if memory serves me correctly, and the Irish government refused it. They could have given that to the People's Club Ireland. They might have done something useful with it. Yeah, I have 14.5 billion. No, it doesn't matter. You know, we're okay. It's only the Irish. So Facebook paid just 28.5 million GDP pounds out of sales of £1.65 billion, which is just short of $2 billion. 28.5 million out of 1.65 billion in sales. Go Ogle was even worse. They paid £14.5 million out of £2.3 billion in sales. And earlier this week, the Organisation for Economic and Development proposed tax changes aimed at making global firms pay more tax. The proposals would give governments more power, specifically to tax big technology firms such as Apple, Facebook, and Go Ogle. Now, companies that do business in more than one country have long been a challenge for tax authorities because they can structure their business in a way that minimises their tax bills. And the OECD proposal includes new rules on where tax should be paid and on the proportion of their profits that should be taxed in each country. Here. Will it go ahead? Will you get an actual politician to discuss that policy or that bill or sign for it? California next. Republican Devin Nunes. We warned to watch this guy earlier in an earlier show. Well, now he's gone ahead and sued Clinton News Network, better known as CNN, for defamation on Tuesday, accusing the cable network of publishing a demonstrably false hit piece about him amid his high-profile opposition to the Trump impeachment inquiry, and the 47-page lawsuit filed in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia accuses the network of publishing numerous false and defamatory statements about Nunes on November the 22nd, when journalist Vicky Ward reported claims that Nunes met with Ukrainian prosecutor Viktor Shokin in Vienna in 2018 to dig up dirt on Hunter and Joe Biden. Why would they have to go all the way over there to dig up dirt? You can get it off the internet. There's loads of it. These people make no sense. Nunes, who has been leading GOP opposition to the House Democratic impeachment inquiry, says he did not go to Vienna or anywhere else in Austria in 2018 and has never met Shokin. Nunes is seeking at least $435 million in compensatory and punitive damages. Oops. Love it. Let's hope we can get some more to go after all the others and shut them all down. It's just a complete waste of time. Listen to those clowns. And talking of clowns, this rolls nicely into the last of the news before we go into sub-intel. Pelosi has been attending summits as the Speaker of the House, which has been largely overlooked, is outside of her remit. And yet the public say nothing. The media, well, you expect the media to say nothing because they haven't got a single brain cell between them. They just read Langley-based scripts. And then you've got Mnuchin hopping back and forth to Israel. And again, no one's saying nothing. He's supposed to be the treasurer. But you got anyone who mentions Russia, does a call to Russia, and it's all collusion. But go to Israel, who, unlike Russia, have attacked our troops. For those of you who forget, go and check the 1967 incident out. And unlike Russia, Israel gets vast funds to feed their war machine, all paid for by the American taxpayer. And unlike Russia, their citizens get large tax breaks when America has dual citizens. And unlike Russia, they sold American secrets, technology, and other classified materials to China, and yet no one says anything. Wonder why. So the impeachment rolls on. I don't want to really talk much about that. It's pure drivel, like the Russian collusion. But Adam Schiff for Brains rolls on with it, and that is about as pointless as alt media clowns. And then we have a final quote from Anne, better known as Hillary Clinton, I suppose, before it passed on a few years ago, making statements like this one. I, for one, am grateful for vaccines saves lives. Oh dear. Clintons don't. Clintons clearly don't save lives, given the trail that follows behind them. You know, that woman and her daughter were a pair of stupid bitches, let's be honest. And she would be best going off and practicing walking up and down stairs, as I suspect she's due another stair incident. Have a nice day, Anne.